that article about Sid. Tell us a bit about that when it came out.
Well, I mean, it came out in early 1974 and was important in the sense that it was the first time the Syd Barrett story had been made public. Syd Barrett had done interviews when he'd been promoting his 2 albums in the music press. And and some of the journalists that had interviewed him made a few guarded comments about his state of mind, but no one had actually gone and interviewed all the principal characters in the Syd Barrett saga, apart from Sid himself, and pieced it together and presented it as a story. So it had an effect. At the time, Syd Barrett meant very, very little, it seemed. I remember at the time when I presented the idea to the NME, certain editors were kind of cynical about the idea because they thought, well, Syd Barrett's finished, I mean, no one's really interested in Syd Barrett. Here's the Pink Floyd, they just had this huge hit with Dark Side of the Moon, but no one's really interested in Syd Barrett. But I felt otherwise. It was a personal fascination of mine what had happened to Syd Barrett. I'd been lucky enough to see him live with the Pink Floyd in what would have been one of his final performances as a 4-piece before Dave Gilmour was brought on. And I just wanted to it was fast, it was a huge mystery that I wanted to try and solve. What had happened to him, whether it was possible that he could come back, And it was, throughout the late winter and early spring of 74, I interviewed various people. David Gilmour phoned me up where I was living in Clapham. I'd never spoken to him before in my life, and I hadn't in fact got in touch with the Pink Floyd. I'd spoken to people around the Pink Floyd, but I hadn't spoken to any of the Pink Floyd. I didn't think that they would want to comment, that because they hadn't really commented on the Sid situation in any depth. Well, since he departed. So, and Gilmour phoned up and said, well, I hear you've been asking her about Sid, and I feel that I should talk to you because some of the people maybe have a rather twisted view of what happened, and I would like to talk, give our version to you of what happened with Sid. And we got together in a pub which was just down the road from the NME offices in Longacre. It was about 7 o'clock, and I talked to him, and he talked for about an hour and a half, and he talked in a very candid way. He was very open. You could see that, the thing clearly haunted. The whole scenario had left a deeply haunting effect on everybody that had crossed paths with Syd Barrett and who'd known him, who'd been friends or collaborators. Anyway, the piece came out in April, and it got a huge response. I don't think any article I've ever written received the kind of response that did. I got sacks of mail from people. And I was kind of expecting something like that because I knew in my heart that Syd Barrett and also Nick Drake later were these kind of, they were the 20th century version, the late 20th century versions of your kind of doomed romantic poets. These people were enormously attractive to young people, particularly in their teens, young women who've yet to have sex. Take a look at photographs of Syd Barrett and, it's just perfection, because he has everything of that kind of doom romantic poet. And I understood how powerful the story could be, and it was. And as a consequence, the Pink Floyd really had to come to terms with the public unveiling of the SYD scenario. They've always been uncomfortable about it. I think for good reason. Not because they behaved badly, particularly, more because it was such a traumatic... When someone goes crazy, and he's a friend of yours and they're young, and you're in trying situations, when you're going to gigs and travelling around in a little van and the usual, grim situations that being a professional rock musician in the late 60s and 70s was presenting people, then your main impetus is towards surviving. And if someone is playing up, you are not sympathetic to the possible cause of why that person is playing up. So, I think they had very conflicted and complicated feelings that they decided to just keep a lid on. When that article came out, that lid came off, just by necessity. They were in a situation where they were making an album and they didn't have a fixed idea as to what the concept would be. And so, you write about what you know. You write about SYD. He was already out there. It was a perfect opportunity for Roger Waters in particular to write his own version of the SYD scenario and write his own feelings about how he felt about his former colleague. As a song, the verses, I think are very heartfelt, and I think they're good. I think the images that he makes, that he conveys about Barrett's sort of disintegration are very are poignant. But it's when he gets to that kind of chorus line where it's like, come on, you've got to shine, you've got to get up off the floor and shine. It really reminds me of, that sadistic gym teacher that many young men and many young people in Britain had, who, when there's one of the lads in his team has broken his leg and is lying on the pitch, and he goes over and, oh, come on, lad, get up there and get back in the scrum. Syd Barrett wasn't, Syd Barrett had left the building. He wasn't going to come back and shine. It was a misreading of the situation. It's interesting because when I spoke to Gilmour that night about Barrett, he said at one point, he conveyed similar emotions. He said at one point, well, it's a tragedy what's happened, but I can't help thinking, on the one hand, we might be enabling him. We're doing these songs of his. We recorded one of his songs on Ummagumma, so the royalty rate, he'll get royalties from that, but also we put out Piper at the Gates of Dawn again in a double album package called A Nice Pair. And now Syd's going to get the lion's share of the songwriting royalties from that record. That was we released that straight after Dark Side of the Moon, and that was a very, very good. It sold very, very well. So they were floating Syd Barrett financially with the royalty stream that they themselves were providing for him. And Gilmour was saying, well, we were doing this and we're doing that, but we're wondering, we're all asking ourselves, basically, if we weren't providing this money, maybe he'd reach a point where there'd be the day of judgment and he could actually pull himself together under his, he'd do his own bootstraps up. So there was this feeling that maybe if he was left to his own devices, he might shine again, which is it's fair enough, but obviously wasn't true. Now the story we know of Sid Barrett is that he was incapable of returning.